Hi, and welcome to another episode of Forward Thinking. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue à une autre émission de Forward Thinking. Forward Thinking, c'est un programme réalisé conjointement par la Conférence sur le gouvernement numérique Forward 50 et l'Académie numérique de l'École de la fonction publique du Canada. In this episode, we're going to talk to some of Canada's regional digital government officers. Regional government has its own challenges, whether they're at the municipal or the provincial or territorial level, and 2020 has been no exception. In this episode, I'll be joined by a number of digital government ministers, some of whom could only join for a few minutes, and also Canada's Minister of Digital Government, the Honourable Joyce Murray. Minister Murray and I had many other things to discuss, and we actually spent another half hour on the phone following the recording of this episode, so we're going to publish that as another episode on this channel. So let's get started as we dig into the unique challenges and promise of digital government. Why don't each of you very briefly, in like 10 seconds, starting with Rick, say who you are and where you are, and everybody else mute your microphones. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Alistair. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Rick Wind. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Government of the Northwest Territories in Yellowknife.
And those are actual Northwest Territories, Northern Lights, but they are a recording of them, correct?
That's correct. It's not that dark here.
All right, Dave, you're out on the rock.
Hi, Alistair. Thanks for the opportunity as well. My name is Dave Heffernan. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Government of Newfoundland and Labrador here in St. John's, Newfoundland.
And Dominique, where are you?
Dominique Vaughn. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for the Government of Alberta, and I'm here in Edmonton.
Awesome. And let's go around the circle. Aaron, how about you? Where are you right now?
Hi, I'm in the basement of my undisclosed location, south of the border. I'm Aaron Snow. I head the Canadian Digital Service, which is the branch of the federal government responsible for this stuff.
Hillary, how about you?
Hello, I'm in Toronto, in Leslieville, and I am the Deputy Minister responsible for the Ontario Digital Service and the Chief Digital and Data Officer for Ontario.
Fantastic. And Minister Murray.
Hi, I'm in beautiful Vancouver. I'm a Member of Parliament for Vancouver Quadra and the Minister of Digital Government for Canada.
So, Minister Murray, let's start there. Dominique had a question as we were getting ready for this about air cover. And I've heard a somewhat apocryphal story that when we realized that Canada was going to launch the Canada Emergency Relief Benefits, we didn't have the capacity needed. And then Prime Minister Trudeau just said, okay, people with birth dates in these 3 months come in on one day and these on the next day and these on the next day to spread the load. And people said, okay, and it just worked, as opposed to trying to spin up 4 times the capacity. That feels like air cover from the federal level on behalf of people trying to solve hard technical problems. So maybe you can talk a little about your background at the provincial level and how you got this job of digital government minister and what that means.
Well, I think it would be the Prime Minister who would be able to answer that question because, of course, appointments are at the privilege of the Prime Minister. I was the Minister of Management Services for British Columbia in 2004, and we dealt with many of similar types of issues as I'm dealing with digital government. When you talk about the CERB, I would say that is very much a signature program for how we can work together across situation quickly and well. I will say that one of our digital governments, I'll give credit to Aaron and the other deputies in digital government, that we brought forward the concept that we cannot do things complicated and fast without it being risky. So the CERB, if you'll remember, was actually an amalgamation of an intended 4 separate programs. And so there was a bit of a, we recognized that we had to simplify to be able to deliver, and to the credit of the public servants and Shared Services Canada that enabled literally hundreds of thousands of public servants to work remotely with secure sharing types of tools almost overnight. It was quite a historic time period, and it was on behalf of the citizens that we needed to deliver for. But Alistair, the question that I have for the group is this: the government, the politicians can provide air cover, but only when citizens see that what we're doing is important. And so I had a colleague say, who had been in the IT world for 35 years, he said, this whole arena is eye glazing for the public. So the question that I have for the group is, what kinds of things do you offer in your province that the public can really understand why that's important? So how do we frame this in a way that the public it's the language that they can hear and respond to, and it's tangible, and it's something we can offer in say a year, we'll do this because it's important to you. If the public sees this as important, then that builds air cover.
That's a good question. I'm going to point to people and get them to answer. So Dominique, why don't you field that one first? Hillary, welcome back. We're talking about what do your constituents and the public get excited enough about that they're willing to engage in the kinds of transformations we know are necessary and the things that are possible with digital. You want to field that, Dominique?
I love that question. Thank you so much. But I'm going to say, like, actually, it's more that I just want people to have better experiences and not even really notice that we're here, right? So, I mean, when I look around and, you know, provincial government just does a lot of heavy lifting on really citizen-facing services. So I just try to, you know, cut through as much of the, you know, the administrative work and look at the things, look at what is highest transaction, highest volume, what are most people trying to do with government, and get that working well. So, I mean, we did things like fixing like the childcare subsidy application, which was, you know, a PDF online but not actually an online service. So people they would send this complex application into the void, you know, knowing they have to get, you know, they're going back to work, they need childcare, and not have anything come back to them. So to make things work seamlessly and well. I mean, we're doing a lot of things with courts, a lot of things with social services. And I mean, the opportunities now when frankly the barriers, you know, that we might have felt, sort of psychological barriers, things that have to be in person, those are really leveled out, I think, so we can do even better now. So to me, I just want things to work well for my mom and for average citizens, you know, who are trying to get their stuff done. So I think the engagement just comes from that better set of experiences. So we can do all that, you know, heavy lifting behind the scenes to make that happen. But you know, the better people experience government, you know, the more credible, you know, I think we are as government. So maybe that's kind of a non-answer, but it's the unglamorous stuff that I think gets.
Well, but you're echoing something that Katie Pham and Ayushi Roy were talking about on an early episode. There's so much low-hanging fruit. I asked a question about AI and they were like, come on, AI? How about we just take PDFs and make them interactive?
Even that.
And her point was like, it's great. When y'all have figured out AI in 10 years, then maybe we'll use it. But right now, we have so much low-hanging fruit that we can fix.
And we just got, I mean, I'll stop, I promise. But we got to get our data sorted, right? I mean, to make things like AI work well, we just have to admit that in government, we have a whole lot of paper data lakes. Like we have to actually start, you know, getting the right data, and then we can have real fun. And then we can, you know, but yeah, we can have nice things. We can make services work better, but we have to do some of that big work behind the scenes so that the cool things will work for us. I'm going to stop.
It's great. You don't feel you need to stop. So I do want to try something though. I've set up a thing called Mentimeter, and I've asked people to go and type in what's the thing that's keeping you busiest right now, because I know you're all busy. I'm incredibly grateful that you had the time to spend here on a call. What is the thing that keeps you up at the moment? Like, what's the thing that is consuming much more of your time than you thought it would? And obviously, COVID and pandemic response is huge, but it seems like there are so many burning problems right now. So if any of you want to chime in, you know, modernizing IT service delivery is a really good example of something that we have all these things we want to do with digital government, but just making sure that we have a reliable underlying cloud infrastructure, for example, is a challenge. So I'm not sure who typed this one in. Who typed in modernizing IT service delivery?
That would be me.
That would be you. So Rick, while other people are typing in theirs, why don't you tell us what you mean by that?
I think it's about retooling. I use the analogy of a plant a lot when I'm talking to my own team about how, if we're going to become more efficient, more effective, we need to optimize the plant so that we can deliver better widgets faster, stronger, and more capable for the government. So it's about adapting or addressing a skills gap, modernizing our approaches, looking to implement and transform into more agile approaches, being willing to take a risk and to move initiatives along faster. The whole fail fast, learn fast kind of model. But it's really about transitioning from a legacy approach to solution management, solution implementation, and into a more modern, more agile one that takes advantage of things like cloud and that.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting. I hadn't really thought about the two ITs. There's the IT of digital government making things better for service delivery, and then there's the IT of giving people underlying platforms that allow them to do things like DevOps and continuous deployment and agile methodologies, which sits astride a whole lot of other technologies. Minister Murray, what do you think are the biggest challenges in getting like a reliable national infrastructure? And are there any plans? Obviously, cloud computing works when there are more people, right? The whole idea of a cloud is that you build to the spikes and amortize across a large number of constituents. Are there any plans to create a national cloud that's available to the municipal, federal, and provincial because it becomes economically feasible, or are there obstacles to that?
Well, there's always obstacles in accelerating the digital transformation. I mean, in a country as large as Canada, and also with our federal structure and a lot of authorities in the hands of provinces and territories, collaboration, of course, is super important. We also have a bit of a culture, Westminster parliamentary system, the department. So I would say that working together across departments, figuring out how we can share data, information, applications, create the building blocks so that we're not duplicating things department by department or some of the challenges. And then underneath that, we have Shared Services Canada, which is an amazing organization of dedicated IT professionals, some 7,500 of them, who are wrestling with lots of legacy issues. Because even though we began to really invest in the fundamental unseen basis of all of IT in about 2016, there is certainly a lot more to do. So, I mean, I'd love to hear Aaron's answer on this because he's been charged with being the magician and doing some of this transformation. And he is very aware of just the super tanker that the Canadian government is. So we have a huge commitment to this. But I did want to mention in terms of Dominique's comment about that you just want to fix things and make it work better. When I was talking about air cover and the politicians being able to say, hey, this is a priority for our government, it's not good enough really to say to the public, you don't need to know what we're doing, we're just under the covers trying to fix things. We actually have to show them what it is that will be better for them, how it'll be easier to interact with government in specific ways. And that's the kinds of examples I'm looking forward to hearing from you about, because I'm consulting on this right across the country right now. How can we talk to the public in the way that they get it, that transforming and accelerating this transformation should be a top of mind priority for the federal government?
Yeah, we had the digital minister for Argentina. I think her last name was Bequez. A lot of names on our list. And she talked about implementing national digital identity in 4 years. And there were a lot of people in the audience going, wait, what? And I think doing those case studies of what's possible elsewhere has been really good. So I'm going to ask Aaron and Hillary, because both of you have unique perspectives in that you came here from the States and you've worked at the regional level and you've seen, 18F and the Presidential Innovation Fellows and so on. Where do you think, to Minister Murray's question, where do you think the magic is going to happen that sort of unlocks this potential, Aaron? And what have you done for us lately? I mean, come on.
What have you done for us lately? That's okay, from the macro to the micro. So, I mean,
Sorry, I have to jump in there. What's he done for us lately? Think about COVID Alert, our exposure notification app, a national app.
Which is fantastic. Yeah, I'm being absolutely sarcastic. I meant, what has he done today?
And also a collaboration with Hillary, by the way. Yeah. So just Mr. Murray, I think, hit the nail on the head about the fact that saying that we want to make better experiences is not enough to help the folks at the very top, sell it, right? And fund it. More to the point. I think especially given the danger of a potentially shrinking revenue base across the board for the provinces, for cities, for the federal government. I think, and this isn't always that much fun to talk about, and it's not, it's sometimes one of the ugly answers, and it's full of danger and it's fraught. But understanding the efficiency prize, and what it means to be able to reduce the cost of service delivery and the cost of operating government, recognizing actual reduction in cost, thanks to digital, is super important. I think as part of the case. I fundamentally, I think one of the ways we sell this is that this is, plumbing that pays for itself. That's not a terribly sexy answer, I don't think.
No, I talked to the CIO of MetLife a few years ago, and he said he instituted a policy where if you had a pet project, you could do something that cut costs, and he would give you $66 out of $100 for that project. So you have a pet project you think is wonderful, go cut costs somewhere else and come back with us. And he said it led to the fastest reduction in costs and expansion of services, because it forced people to go, what dead wood can I get rid of that we're not actually using? There may have been a very complex physical policy that could be implemented with a drop-down list box or a couple of if statements, and all of a sudden the cost was gone. But he put that forcing factor, like, I'm not going to give you money, you got to cut, and then I'll let you have 2/3 of it. Hillary, what are your thoughts? You are also instrumental in the COVID response and have seen things on both sides of the border here.
Yeah, I think we're at a bit of a tipping point, just to be honest. Governments, businesses all sent folks home and helped them figure out how to work from home, which brought kind of into focus how people have to interact with the government day to day. When folks were sort of forced to be digital in the way that we're working, I think it just opened eyes to everything that does need to be improved. And especially because this, so much of this work is focused on people, which is our mantra in general. But we're trying to keep people safe. We're trying to keep people alive. We're trying to keep people healthy. And it's really created a very interesting opportunity to kind of quote unquote sell the importance of true service design, of end-to-end service design and delivery. So even just anecdotally, the stories that we're hearing about folks using our self-assessment tool, deciding they need to go get a test, and then using the assessment center search that we built right into that, and then able to go to the assessment center, and then we're not really in control of the process anymore. They have to jump out, they have to go, they have to make a separate phone call or find out if there's an appointment or go get in line. And so, we're walking through kind of that happy path, what we'd love to see. And you look around the table and you think, it's not like that? How could it not be like that? So, I think it's been an interesting moment of bringing really what we talk about as service design into focus.
Well, that's something that Jen was saying as well, is it's not enough. You know, one of the criticisms that was leveled at the COVID response was that the apps existed, but they didn't dovetail with legislation. So like Bianca Wiley has been pretty vocal in saying, hey, the app's great. Everybody looks at it. They can see the code. They can, you know, yes, that's great. But it's not clear what happens on the government policy side when someone tests positive. Like that part was not as well articulated. But Jen's point was, we have to look at that both ways. Legislators need to start crafting legislation that is implementable, just as much as app developers need to start building apps that are transparent in how they interact with legislation. Is that the tipping point you think we're at, Hillary?
That's certainly one of them. I mean, one of the things that if you listen to the folks who started GDS and all of us who followed in their wake, you talk about multidisciplinary teams, and you can't just have a designer and a developer doing what they think is best to bring something to fruition. You have to have that full kind of suite of capability and capacity on a product team. And in government, absolutely, that means policy. We have to be joined at the hip with policy. The COVID Alert app, actually, the sort of creation of that, how it came to life, partnering with private sector, et cetera, was, I think, just incredible, because it is a collaboration story at the end of the day across government, but also just in terms of, you know, we had policy people baked in, making sure that they were questioning, and did we get it 100% right at the end of the day? No, there's lots of things that could be improved on, but from the privacy perspective and from, you know, trying to understand get our heads wrapped around what this thing was really going to do, it was, I think, a really unique opportunity to show that, yeah, we've got developers at the table, but we've got policy people sitting right there with them, helping folks understand the decisions we're making.
And Mr. Murray, I know you have to leave in a couple of minutes. I think that we touched a little bit on this in some of these answers, but I would love to hear your thoughts on identity, because my soapbox for digital identity is you can't provide a service delivery until you know who someone is and what they're entitled to. But with driver's licenses and healthcare at the provincial level, and the federal government having a different set of stuff with the CRA and so on, figuring out unified identity and finding the right trade-off between giving up some of our privacy in return for the utility that comes from a service. I remember being surprised with CERB. One of the advantages that nobody really talked about was that Canada has relatively few banks and they're heavily regulated. And in times of economic growth, we get criticized for that. But then, you know, when the 2008 bubble burst, Canada wasn't crippled by that. And it does seem like the fact that we had a relatively small number of banks, and you could just click a button and log in with your bank and get some money, that we had these digital identity systems in place, and that you know, the fabric of our society happens to dovetail well with some of these services. What do you think is going to happen in the next 5 years for digital identity? And I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this, but it does seem to me like it's the cornerstone of all the things we're talking about, but we still haven't moved things forward as much as we should. And Minister Murray, since you have to go, maybe you can take the first stab at that.
Well, yes, for sure, digital identity is one of those foundational pieces. A lot of work has been being done on that by a lot of smart people. And so this is another example of the complexity of Canada. I mean, when you think about what Estonia did, if they don't have the federal provincial system, I mean, in a way, it forces us to talk and to cooperate and work together, but it also makes it more time consuming. So we are utterly dedicated to moving that project forward. And I'm not going to pose a deadline by which time we'll have it done.
Yeah, it is. I think people underestimate just how complicated it is. But as you say, if there was a thing that the citizens got really excited about and desperately wanted, and it was clear that identity was tied to that, you know, it's almost like we need to find a national killer app for identity. And then when we've done that, it'll be much better. And maybe to some extent, things like COVID was the killer app for digital identity.
Okay, well, a couple of other things I wanted to say. In your comments and introducing this topic, you talked about what would people be willing to give up in terms of privacy. I don't want to see it that way, and I don't think we need to. So I think that we can create this digital identity in a way that increases people's privacy protection and security. And I think there was a number of examples of how we can do that. And COVID Alert, for example, is something that is very strongly protective of privacy, such that even the Federal Privacy Commissioner said he would be using it. So I don't want to make those kinds of assumptions. The other thing that I wanted to also make sure is on the table is my current mantra is that digital is at the heart of everything we offer. So I want people to think about policies are important, and people understand that having a universal childcare or having a policy or a service that is offered by government is important, but underneath that is digital. And so they go so hand in hand. And so that's the message that I think that is so important for the public to understand, is that digital is at the heart of everything we do. And so if a policy is important, we need to think about with the same importance. COVID taught us that. COVID taught us that delivery is key, and that is fundamentally about digital these days. So thanks for the opportunity, Alistair, to be in this chat and this conversation. And it's great to see everybody else on the panel. And so enjoy the rest of your discussion.
See you soon.
Bye.
Alistair, could I just jump in on that?
Oh yeah, please do. And
I think,
if you want to talk to other people instead of me, they're much more interesting than I am. So yell at other people.
Well, I'd love to have other folks jumping in, but just going back to my point about that kind of end-to-end digital delivery, we can't do that without digital identity, full stop. We, in Ontario, we've been mapping the service journeys for hundreds of services, trying to just basically understand every service we provide, and then sort of prioritizing which ones are not digital, that should be, which ones are digital but don't work very well, etc. And we found that, a good 3/4 of them, 70-75% of all of our services require some level of identity verification. Obviously, most of which currently happens in person, whether you walk into a Service Ontario or anywhere else. So we absolutely cannot do that end-to-end delivery. We cannot do true service design until we crack this nut.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I keep coming back to is most citizens are very comfortable signing in with Google or Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn. That protocol called OAuth is a pretty simple protocol that says, hey, I trust that organization, they trust you, therefore you are who you claim to be. But there's no OAuth from the federal government or the provincial governments, and there could be, and you would have recourse. Like, I can't go to Facebook and say, hey, I don't trust that you let me log into this site that's now got malware on it, because I got no recourse, whereas the federal government could use that to protect our most vulnerable citizens by providing some kind of trusted single sign-on rather than letting them use their passwords, the same password everywhere, and get hacked. We have opportunities to take our digital infrastructure and make it available to other people. But I'm completely with you that so much of this stuff it builds on digital. And I think what we don't talk about enough is the second order benefits. So when the cell phone first came out, the benefit was a rich guy like Gordon Gekko standing on a beach on the Jersey Shore calling his assistant. That was the stereotypical first cell phone use, right? It was for the very rich who were so important they needed to be able to reach someone anytime. Fast forward 30 years, and the cell phone is now how we do two-factor authentication. It's how we babysit. Like, there's all these other things we didn't know cell phones were for until everybody got them. And it feels to me, I mean, I think we're seeing this with video now, that we're seeing people go and talk to their GP and their specialist at the same time and reduce the number of meetings everyone has, where they never would have done that before out of necessity. So it seems to me like we need to sell the second order benefits that happen when everybody has the thing, because that's where the real utility comes from. The initial use cases tend to be either extremely marginalized or extremely privileged. And it's the second order benefits that produce those changes. So when you look at those services, do you get a sense of which of those things it's not just that we can make it better by making it digital, but we will now have new capabilities. Like, there's going to be some additional benefit that we didn't think was even possible by going digital.
So, I mean, I would love to hear from the folks in the provinces about this, about specific use cases. I just want to, like, there's a slightly fine point on this, which is it's not just that there has to be that benefit, but that benefit has to be something that somebody can say, okay, this is worth investing this many millions of taxpayer dollars in over this many years to get, right? Because, like, the problem right now isn't that we have no sign in or no authentication, right? It's that we have, you know, a cornucopia of them, and they're all different, and few of them are very, very good, if any, right? And so you log in a bunch of different places, you know, but you can, right? It's just that the experience is so, and, you know, you can't cross-pollinate, you can't integrate across, right? Like you're missing all the things you'd get if you had one really good system. So yeah.
So Dominique, Dave, Rick, what are your thoughts on digital identity at the provincial level?
Yeah, so I agree with Hillary. We're at a tipping point, I think, where we've all been playing around the edges and not really needing to dive in on having this, you know, pan-Canadian digital identity, if you will. And we've been able to do our own individual services with, you know, level 0, level 1 authentication type identity. But I think we're at this tipping point now where COVID has driven us there, and we're seeing a much greater demand. So back to what Minister Murray was saying earlier, how do you get the people to want to come? I think COVID has driven a lot of that, at least in our province it has, and I'm sure in everybody else's. We've seen such an increase in a want for more digital services. We can now not keep up with the demand. So, and a lot of those services are going to, as Hillary said, it's the foundational piece. So we need to get that digital identity figured out. So, you know, what is that single use case that we can all sort of, you know, show the public the benefit in it for them? I don't know if there is one or not. I think it's, you know, maybe it's the driver's license and having that in a digital form, or I'm not sure what the actual single use case is, but I am sure that it's foundational, as Hillary said, to everything that we're going to do from a digital perspective.
How about you, Dominique? What services are the citizens now demanding now that they've got a taste?
Well, I mean, I think I think Hillary's point about, you know, actually doing that real service inventory and looking where the real pressure is what we need to do. Because I think it's not one killer app. I think it's a bunch of things, right? And the more of them there are, the more you're going to get over that tipping point. And I mean, I think for identity, I mean, not to be too contentious, but we really do have to do it right. I mean, you talk about OAuth. I mean, like, you need to have that seamless, that really good user experience, but you also have to be those services have to be very readily available to developers and development teams, right? And I mean, I think for a lot of us, we've built our identity in an older technology that is not necessarily that easy to access for developers, right? So we have we've got some important work to do there to make that really convert, I think, like, not to get too nerdy about it, but that's going to be work that we have to do, right? Because we can't spend, I mean, you know, you can spend 6 months building the great digital service, and then if you have to spend another 6 months integrating it to your, you know, your digital ID, it's like, wow, that does not speak to the efficiency that Aaron is talking about, right? I mean,
yeah, and I see people who stand up an app on Product Hunt in 3 days, and they just go grab some React frameworks and they're done, and it just works, exactly, right? Exactly. But if you're having to integrate with COBOL on the back end, that causes some issues. Please don't apologize for being nerdy, Dominique. We need more nerdy in the world.
My people. Oh,
that's right. So Rick,
but anyway.
So Rick, you're up north, and I think you're talking at an even more foundational level about what citizens want, which is like, all this stuff's great, but if you can't get broadband, it doesn't help anybody, right?
I think you're right, Alistair. I mean, I think as important and as passion, I mean, I share the passion with everybody on the panel about how important digital is to modernizing service delivery for government, both. And I also mentioned both internal service delivery and external service delivery. In government, we tend to emphasize the external delivery in a lot of forums, but there's a lot of efficiency to build on Aaron's comment to be had just by kind of optimizing the machinery of government as well. That can't be ignored. But I think that it just reinforces the fact that there is a significant digital divide still within the country, and we certainly feel that in the north, and we can't as public sector agencies, we have to recognize that, and we have to continue to build and develop service delivery models that supports the whole spectrum of society, recognizing that divide is transitioning rapidly over time. But it does go back to the, digital identity is key. I agree, it's a foundation piece. I think we're doing an awful lot of work across the jurisdictions on digital identity, and it's very positive. And so I think that 5-year window, we will be able to see some significant advances in that space. But we also have to figure out now how to continue to bridge that divide, and how to make sure we're developing for choice and options. You mentioned there are a lot of people that like to use the Facebook or Twitter, use their social media accounts for credentials. That may not be good enough for government services. We need something possibly more robust, and there are also still a lot of people that don't want to do that. So it's not necessarily one exact solution. It's a couple of different solutions that will meet some different use cases, but give people the assurance and confidence they need in the solution.
Yes. And I just want to say quickly, hi, Jamie, how are you? We now have BC on the phone too. I love this sort of call-in model we have. Jamie, we've been talking a little bit about digital identity. Minister Murray had to leave earlier. Service delivery, a little bit about COVID. And we're going to get to some questions on regulation and security and where the line is between public and private sector service delivery. But before we go back to Dominique, actually, Dominique, why don't you finish what you're going to say, and then we'll let Jamie introduce herself.
Oh, that was me. Sorry.
Sorry, why don't we let Hillary? I'm having trouble keeping track of all the rectangles, as I'm sure we all are.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I wanted to throw a little bit of a wrench into the conversation, because a lot of the talk has been about single sign-on, about logging in, about having an account, OAuth, etc. But honestly, talking about digital identity, for me, it's just data. It's just attributes. And how can the government do a better job of managing that and authenticating someone, but not needing an account? So like, think of walking into Service Canada or Service Ontario. I don't need an account to go in and do my business. I just have to prove who I am. And a lot of people only interact with the government, I don't know, every few years, maybe even. And so do I need an account? Probably not. I need to be able to walk in, prove who I am, pay for my transaction, and leave, and not think about it till I get my next notification. And for me, that's the really interesting piece of digital identity, because it's totally separate from single sign-on, and it could really allow us to, I think it was Dominique's point, to have many killer apps.
We've seen that in Quebec with the weed stores. You can buy your stuff without signing in, but you still need to prove to Canada Post that you're actually 18 when they show up. So it's a very interesting, or 21 or whatever it is. There's a very interesting, like, transactional. There's several times where different authentications are happening for different purposes. Like, one is, are you a person who's paying legitimately? And another is, are you a person who's allowed to consume marijuana? And they're like, and it turns out Canada Post is very good at verifying your identity and your age. So I thought that was a fascinating example of building a new service on top of some of these things that we have in place. Hi, Jamie. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for including me in this conversation. And I'm sorry to pull the somewhat diva-like move of calling in from a garage and joining you for about 5 minutes. But I couldn't help myself with such a great crowd and an important conversation.
Yeah, Jen Polka said, I think on one of the talks earlier, necessity is the mother of acceptance, that we're all very, very tolerant right now. And I think that's a great way to look at the upside of COVID. I think I need to make a t-shirt of that. Before we get further along here, I'm going to do a little plug, but I want to talk to you about something. And Jamie, you won't have seen this. We were using an app called Menti. We were anticipating if lots of people showed up, we would poll people for questions. But I did want to show you one thing. 3 of you have been at Forward 50 in the past. And Jamie and Hillary, you were instrumental in setting up this thing called the Regional Digital Government Summit, which is kind of weird because all the other groups we work with, there's a there like Apex or the CIOSC. There's no there for this Regional Digital Government Summit. It's just a bunch of people got together and talked about stuff. But we made a decision that we actually are announcing today that we are going to make 2 Forward 50 virtual tickets free to any public servant, per municipality, territory, state, or province in the world. So all of the digital nations, if Estonia comes in, they can go, hey, Tallinn, you get 2 passes. Hey, Victoria, you get 2 passes. hey, Edmonton, you get 2 passes, because we figured this is a great way to roll out the red carpet for Canada. So we just launched this today. I know it's a bit of a plug, but I think that one of the reasons that we wanted to get the Regional Digital Government Summit happening at Forward 50 was because these problems are not going to get solved by any one jurisdiction. You know, if you're in charge of Quebec, well, there's this other thing, there's Montreal, and then there's the rest of Quebec. And sure, there's Quebec City and a few others, but you know, you have these, Canada's a unique country in that we have these very, very large anchor municipalities. So we talked about how the provinces and territories work with the federal government when the minister was on. Maybe we can talk about how that works at the municipal level. Like how do you find yourselves interacting with municipal leaders? So Jamie, how much of your time is Vancouver and Victoria versus British Columbia?
Yeah, for me, it's almost entirely in the province. Like we've got our own challenges, but the cities are absolutely really, really important and strong collaborators. You know, so often, especially in the data space, if people are consuming data, they don't care really which order of government that data is coming from. They just want to get their hands on the data. Same thing for service provision, right? And I think that there's a huge opportunity for that collaboration between orders of government. One of the really exciting things that we did out of the BC government over the last few months was using the BC Services Card to enable accreditation with the federal government. So if you're a British Columbian and you're going to go file your taxes, everybody else in Canada can use their MyCRA login or their financial institution login. If you're from British Columbia, you can now use your BC Services Card. And we're rolling out the same thing for access to employment insurance and that sort of thing. And so really just understanding that, you know, the public sector, people shouldn't have to navigate the orders of government. They should just be able to have a seamless service experience regardless of who it is that they're dealing with. So often we focused on what that looks like for interaction between our ministries within our governments. I would argue that there are just massive opportunities. We've seen that in the open data space. So aligning data standards across Canada, regardless of which government is contributing the data. I would argue that digital services is the next frontier for that kind of integration. Just huge opportunities.
So some of the other stuff that we struck on when we were getting started with this conversation was the line between public and private sector. We all think it's fine that the government builds highways, but we don't have a federal broadband program, for example. And you know, the Canadian government has a unique history in that we created Petro-Canada in part in response to spiraling oil prices during the oil crisis as a way for the government to sort of regulate things by being a provider of gasoline that could therefore force other providers not to charge exorbitant amounts, because otherwise you just go sit in line at Petro-Canada. Is it time to build a crown corporation for broadband and technology?
I think that there are really good things that we can be doing better on a cross-sector basis. The CIO Strategy Council is huge. You know, some of the, just yesterday coming out with a digital identity standard. You know, we've seen data standards, we've seen standards around ethical AI coming out of that cross-sector body. Increasingly, I think some of the challenges that we grapple with in the private and public sector are going to be similar, and we can collaborate better, right? You know, here in British Columbia on the topic of broadband, we have really close collaboration with private sector entities, TELUS in particular, and it's, you know, they're a critical partner in providing the services we do. But I'd actually take it out of, you know, make it not domain specific, no, you know, going beyond broadband. We can collaborate more effectively across sectors. We can make our procurement systems easier. In BC, we've invested heavily in Sprint with Us and Code with Us, which are 2 procurement programs for getting money out the door faster so that we can get tech talent in the door faster. And those things, yes, they're challenging to set up. Yeah, you spend a lot of time with, you know, your friendly lawyers. But in the end, it means it's the difference between shipping great services quickly to the people we're trying to serve. And that's the point of what we're doing here.
Have the rest of you in the provinces had success coordinating with the private sector to produce outcomes, or like how much of this is happening at the provincial level, as Jamie says, and how much of it is, well, BC did it, so now we're going to piggyback on their work?
I think here it's mainly happening at the public sector level. We don't have a lot of collaboration with the private sector here. It's more federal and provincial, territorial.
and there are definitely developments, right, in cooperation at the federal approach. So Jamie's smiling because one of the things that's happening is that I think there's absolutely joint recognition that Jamie has been one of the people responsible for driving that a digital platform for government, right, not for just the federal government or just a provincial government, but for governments in Canada, is a useful and efficiency yielding and consistency yielding and user experience yielding investment, right? And so there are, and we're getting little creeping bits of it. The COVID Alert app is certainly one example. The Notify service is another, and we think there's absolutely a lot of runway left to invest in there.
Aaron, I think it was you that brought up earlier this idea that we need to. It's not enough to make sure the country, that the government is sort of secure and resilient. I mentioned at the outset that when we used to go to war, there was a front line and people fought on the front line. And today, because our surface is social media and our online personas and the accounts on which we rely, we're at a place where a foreign government could, if they wanted to interfere with a citizen, effectively deplatform that system through identity theft, through phishing, through saying things that were attributed to them, which got other people to reject them or ignore them. You can marginalize or deplatform a citizen from a foreign soil, and everybody's on the front line. And I don't think we've seen that yet, but in the next couple of years, when you start to see foreign nation states deplatforming citizens and making them effectively enemy combatants on their own land, that's a weird situation. You mentioned that one of the roles of government is to prepare businesses for that, and I think it was you, Aaron. But what are you collectively doing to work with the private sector to ensure that the society we have is reasonably resilient?
Oh gosh, so I think it was Hillary who mentioned.
Was it Hillary? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time. I keep calling Hillary. Obviously, you're smart because I keep crediting everybody else for the things you're saying.
That's right. Gosh, I mean, I actually think that the things we're talking about are the very things that will make us more resilient in that respect. The fact that there are lots of different identity and authentication solutions all floating separately out there means that there are more vulnerabilities out there, right? Each one is getting invested in less. They're in various stages of decay and legacy and so on. So, investing in a common digital platform that we all consider, first tier, priority infrastructure, the same way that we would with, our electric systems, our gas systems, et cetera, right up at the top of the list of how to make our digital identity more resilient.
And Dominique, Dave, and Rick, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the private sector to sort of make them more resilient if we as a society are going to start depending on this technology for digital government?
Well, I'll start maybe from a perspective of a smaller jurisdiction that doesn't have a particularly robust IT sector in the Northwest Territories. But we're starting to look, and this is somewhat driven by COVID actually, and the reality that we saw such a strong anchoring of cybersecurity attacks to the COVID messaging, exploiting that vulnerability in society. And so we are, for the first time, actually, my security team is starting to look at what is our obligations to educating public and small private sector business and cottage industry and things like that about cyber risk, and working with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity and other institutions to get information out and to take a little bit more of a leadership role. Historically, we have been pretty much focused within our territorial government boundaries, with some collaboration with other layers of government, but we've really had to rethink that now, and we'll be looking at strategies for messaging and communication and education, and extending our own potentially extending our own internal education platforms to the private sector or to the public in general, because there's such a need for it. But in terms
it does seem like they used to have those things on PBS, the "I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill." I'm sure the Americans on the call understand those, but it seems like we could be doing the same kind of schoolhouse rock for digital awareness and sort of citizen education. Where's the schoolhouse rock for this stuff?
Well, exactly. And I actually think it's probably a tenet that needs to be built into our public safety frameworks, to be honest with you, across the country, and just be one of the pillars of public safety going forward. But, if we're early days still, but I think we recognize an obligation there.
How about you, Dominique? What are you doing in Alberta around public-private preparation for cyber resiliency?
I can't really add much to what's been said. Very similar, for sure. So I can pass
All right, and Dave, anything going on in Newfoundland different from that?
No, I think I already mentioned that as well, but we work with some local organizations like our Newfoundland Labrador Association of Technology Industries and groups like that to try and help. But I would say more along the lines that Rick said, we're more internally focused on, with our limited resources, on just trying to make sure we are resilient.
So, sorry, Dominique.
I mean, this is a little bit adjacent to what you're actually talking about, but I think it's interesting. I mean, what we're looking at a lot is where can we actually work with especially with small local, startups with private sector to actually deliver services together, and what does that really look like? We do a lot of work in the courts and justice and legal space, and there's really interesting startup companies in Canada who are providing legal software that actually enables, say the profession, say firms, to submit documents. This sounds so boring again, sorry, but it's really huge. And actually, it is better for them to build that. It is better for us to think about the API and the security, and to actually have those companies do that development. I mean, of course, I want to own all of it, but it really doesn't make sense. Given our demands for efficiency, if we can do that kind of that central, data regulation, API build, that kind of thing, there's a real opportunity, and I mean, like for us, I think there's, I think we need to do that as government, to actually be encouraging that kind of thing and make it feasible for those companies to, to be able to build that way, right? So I think, and it supports, and we have, great local talent, great schools, great universities that are turning out amazing, digital professionals. Of course, we want to bring a lot of them into government, but we also want to give them an opportunity more on the enterprise side to, as in being enterprising, to help us deliver those services, right? Can't do everything.
So, Hillary, since I keep attributing your great ideas to other people, we are almost out of time, but I thought I'd give you the last word here. You have been involved in governments in lots of parts of the world. What's the biggest, what change do you wish in your heart of hearts you could wave a magic wand and it would fix things? If you had, you get one wish, just one, and you get to fix a thing, and it can't be Hillary's in charge of everything and everything just, it's got to be a reasonable, it can't be I get as many wishes as I want. There's no cheating. But what would the thing be that would most accelerate fair, equal, inclusive digital accessibility to citizens everywhere in your mind? Not to put you on the spot, but what do you wish you could sort of wave a wand and it would fix stuff?
It actually has very little to do with product. I've said a couple times publicly, so hopefully this won't get me in trouble, but that if I could wave a magic wand and make the Ontario Public Service a product-driven organization today, that would get us 50% of the way there. We had the skills, we had the capacity, we had the product mentality, we had product managers, and we were agile, and we were doing things the way that we would love to do them. That would get us a good portion of the way there. But the other piece of it, honestly, is, and this isn't specific to the Ontario government, this is about government and our, I hate to use the B word, but the bureaucracy that we put around funding and planning. And funding and planning it will not allow us to operate that way. Our machinery right now does not allow us to start small and fail, start small and scale. We kind of got to go in big. We got to go all in. We have to, plan for the out years. And I understand that we have to do that. We have to we have to learn new ways of thinking around that, but we also need to have some machinery that allows us to take small bets, that allows us to, invest in people, invest in ideas, and go with them. So for me, if the magic one is really a bit more about the machinery around budgeting and planning.
That's a pretty good answer for an off-the-cuff answer. Well done. So we're at the end of the hour here. If you're just listening in, people are clapping with their emojis. But this is a fascinating conversation. We have not entirely defined what we're going to talk about for the Regional Digital Government Summit, which is happening on November 6th as part of Forward 50. All of you are obviously there, and I'm going to ask unabashedly for you to invite all of the people that you know are like that person in the basement of a city who's convinced they can save the world by building some Google Forms or putting things in a spreadsheet, and nobody listens to them, and they know they can make the world a better place. We want those people to come and realize they're not alone. And I think that's something that many of you can show them. I think it's the lemonade of COVID is this the realization that we can build things that are quickly and important and useful, and I think maybe demonstrations of necessity. So I think if I had to pick a theme for the RDGS this year, how do we become product driven is a really good one, because you're right, that is, as a product manager myself, that feels like familiar territory, but the ability to iterate and do MVPs and release things in order and do tests and so on. What Taiwan is doing with their Gov0, where you can like just change one word in the URL and see the prototype and then switch back to the real world, is a very product-centric mentality. So I think that is a fascinating topic for us to pick up at the Regional Digital Government Summit in November. So thank you all very much for spending time today. I know you all have provinces to go save, important things to do, and it's candidly great to see familiar faces and meet some new ones. So I really appreciate you all joining here, and hopefully we'll see you all online and in person sometime soon, and online sooner than that. So again, this is something we try to do every couple of weeks to keep in touch with people who are changing the world, both in Canada and elsewhere. And I really appreciate you all joining us for this forward-thinking conversation. This will be published on the Forward 50 YouTube channel, but also on busrides.ca, which is an initiative of the Canada School of Public Services Digital Academy, so that people can listen to this stuff as sort of snackable content as they commute or going to work. And if we can be of any assistance, or if you have any other questions, we can handle those offline. I'm sure when this goes live, people will want to tweet at you and ask questions about it. But thank you all very much for your candor and for being here today. It's been great to catch up with all of you.
Thanks for the opportunity, Alistair.
Thank you very much.
Good to see everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.